Okay, hello. All right, let's just take a little moment, settle in to this space, to this minute, this second. Just allow the body to rest in this moment, in this situation. Allow the nervous system to acclimatize to where it is, and detach from where it's been, and refrain as much as possible from projecting anywhere into the future where it is not. So take a little moment to focus on what you can feel right now, the edges of the body, on the seat, even the air in contact with the skin or clothing. And see if you can hone in on one particular sensation, whether that's the clothing on your wrists or your ankles, the tickle of your hair. Just pick one thing out and settle into that. With the in-breath, allow your awareness to travel down and back and in. And with the out-breath, allow relaxation. Allow the letting go. And take another breath and expand your awareness. If you're feeling ready to open your eyes, allow them to adjust to the room, to the light. And then we can meet in this screen together.
Thank you. Hello. That was lovely.
You are welcome. Yeah, I've had a smoothie this morning. I'm on a smoothie kick at the moment.
Nice.
And this is my second cup of coffee. So I'm feeling like a little bit liquid. Like I can feel the fluidity of my body a little bit right now.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
That sounds perfect for our conversation to flow.
Exactly. Do you have anything alive for you right now?
Well, I was wondering what we would talk about today, and I do have like some ideas, but I'm not necessarily like really attached to any of them, so I can start, but if you have something that's like that you're excited to talk about, then we can start with you today.
Sure. I do have something.
Yeah, let's do that then, because mine are not as concrete sounding as your voice sounded then. You sounded certain then.
Well, I can talk about my smoothies. So no, I have something that has been kind of floating around for me this week. So I spent a lot of the COVID years and before that, but specifically the COVID years, detaching from productivity in all senses, and kind of releasing the weight of that expectation, understanding who I am as a human without the pressure, the expectation, and the never-ending conveyor belt that is productivity. And that felt really good. And it feels really good to be free of, I guess, just the understanding that I think the main thing for me, the thing that I needed to detach from the most, was the idea that I had to do certain things in order to be relevant as a human, in order to have any value as a human, that I needed to tick all the right boxes. And even if I wasn't in a workforce, like when I left a job to pursue my own stuff, and I still had that hangover from a job, I was still pushing myself from within the hours of 9 to 5, and I was still trying to hit targets and achieve certain things. And that really felt damaging because it took away all the freedom that self-employment could offer me, and instead kept me within like work mode all the time. So it felt really good to detach from that. And now I am feeling that I think I feel sluggish. I feel sluggish. And I know that this is, it's not really very in the moment to talk about how productivity could be a good thing again, because there's still so many memes and there's still so much talk online about, like, what's that one that I saw, like, we're not made for work, we're made for just, lounging in a forest or in a field, or those kinds of things. And I think that's true and very important, and that we're not, as humans, just made to produce all the time. And yet productivity does help us feel good as humans, does make us feel like we are that we are doing something worthwhile. And I am swimming around in the middle of this pool in between what is rest and what is productivity. I'm wondering what is the right way for me, what's the right balance for me. And I'm not anywhere close to figuring that out yet. But it feels really important for me to recognize that it's not all just about rest, that I don't thrive when I'm just in pure rest, absorbing the wonder around me kind of thing. That's beautiful when I need it, when it's right, when it feels really good. And we need it a lot more than I think, current society allows us. So that's really important for me to say. But also just being in that mode, not good for me. I am a sloth. I have spent too much time resting to the point where now I'm kind of like, I feel as though I have reduced my capacity for doing anything. And that doesn't feel good to me either. Like, it's not like rest at this moment has expanded my capacity to take on more. It feels like I have become, sloth-like. And so any form of newness or any form of difficulty or discomfort is really challenging for me right now. And it feels like I do need to lean back on that more productive essence. I think about I remember years ago us having a conversation about this after I put a post up on Instagram, actually. But I think about nature, and I think about when it is left to run wild, it doesn't just stop. It produces endlessly. It is lush and it is wild and it takes over. There is a life force within cells that wants to recreate more of itself, that wants to be in motion. And so I'm really navigating the strangeness or the discomfort of what's the right amount of rest and work and produce and not produce for me.
Yeah. Oh, I love this conversation. And it's no surprise to me, because this happens all the time with our conversations, that there's this like mirror experience happening. And not only for myself, but this week, the client conversations I've had have been about this as well. So it's so fascinating to me, both of them. That's crazy. So I'd love to just share what I'm learning about this, because it'll just be, it's nice to talk about it, because I like this week, I feel like I've had some little breakthrough moments around this. So maybe they'll resonate. but it's so, yeah. So I definitely did the same thing as you, of coming out of the workplace and that being like, I'm going to be free. And it was like a move towards freedom to be out of the work environment in my own business. But the inner is what creates the outer, right? Like we can't just change the outer and expect to be different or feel different. And I totally did that. I was like, if I can change my job, then I'll feel differently. And no, because I just overlaid my consciousness, my way of being into the business, and it burnt out and was overproductive and all the rest. So totally, if we're trying to leave something to experience something new but not changing on the inside, like never going to work, right? So what I've realized, for me, this is about the masculine and the feminine, and I feel kind of cringe in saying that because I feel like this topic's been overdone, like over talked about, but there's so much value in it for me. And maybe it's not masculine and feminine for other people, maybe it's something different, but it makes sense to me to talk about it in that way, because I feel like this resting that you've been doing and that I've been doing, it has been a return to the sacred feminine, away from the toxic feminine of like neuroticism and overthinking and trying to push through and all of that. Like it's been a return to that more rested, healthy feminine. But there's no balance unless we're able to then flow into the masculine. And I've batted up against that recently with the sort of like stepping back into business after taking such a long break and like languishing in the feminine. And what I've seen is that every time I transition from the feminine into the masculine, I've sort of downloaded and received all these ideas, this wisdom, this creativity, this like vision from the feminine. When I transition into the masculine to try and bring it into action, I used to drop headfirst into toxic, patriarchal masculinity. And then what would happen is I would like push, do things that didn't feel that good, try and bring it all together really too quickly, be overproductive, and then burn out and be like, oh, it's not that. Like, this isn't exciting to me, this isn't fun to me, and I would then like draw back. And actually it wasn't that those ideas had lost their excitement for me, it was just that I hadn't gone about bringing them to life in a way that felt good. So what it is for me is learning about healthy expression of the masculine, and I don't think I certainly haven't got a lot of good role models for that. There doesn't seem to be a lot of examples of that archetype. So it kind of feels to me like being a bit sort of out at sea and being like nothing to really grasp on. So I'm having to like create it from within, which is going to be the best way, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and for me it's looking like knowing when to flow back into the feminine, because my problem has been trying to stay in that productive space for too long and actually not going back into the feminine and like re-resourcing. And I had it this weekend where I was like, oh, it's the weekend, that means transition back into the feminine. And we talked about this in our coaching call, didn't we, like how to seamlessly transition back. And so this weekend I kept getting these thoughts that were coming from the masculine part of me, business related, and I had to be like, no, we're not in that phase, I've transitioned back into the feminine. And it's bringing a lot of interesting stuff for me just to see how I flow between the two. And I think this is the only way I can have sustainability in my work, is to flow back and forth and do like a little bit of action, and then come back and regroup and gather new ideas and soften again. I think before I used to think like, right, let me soften, let me receive the ideas, and then let me just go full pelt to bring it all to life, and I would never have to flow back.
Like that flowy state was only for the getting of the idea, which happens like when you're in your business, maybe twice a year you have something, well, as long as you're kind of doing it sustainably and ethically and with a sort of long-term goal in mind, rather than launching something every 3 seconds. But then it's realistically only going to be a short amount of time in your overall business life that you get a new idea, a new thing.
New fresh inspiration, a whole new vibe. Like I was only spending that short time in there, and actually I think for me, and it's probably different for everyone, I think my natural flow is probably like half a week, like 3-4 days in the feminine and then 3-4 days in action, and then I have to flow back because I can't stay in either one for longer than that, because if I stay in the masculine action too long, I'm burnt out and stressed and not enjoying it and feeling like this isn't what I want, I'm just going to go and get a job. And when I stay in the feminine too long, even if they're both healthy expressions of each, if I stay in the feminine too long, I start to feel like these ideas are not exciting anymore. Like the moment has passed to bring this idea to life. It's stale now. And then, like you said, it becomes like lethargic and uninspired, and kind of self-critical for me. So I see the pitfalls of both. And then when you can bring them together, like I'm not quite got this yet, but I can feel and sense how beautiful it could be to flow between the healthy extremes of each, and like how they could work together. And I mean, that's really creation, isn't it? Like the two halves coming together to make a whole. So it's fun for me to be looking at it through this lens. And for me, it's bringing like new interest into that concept of masculine and feminine, that does feel a bit over talked about. So
I get that cringe. I do it, like it kind of, I think mainly from the sort of like feminine business spiritual person perspective, that sort of like, business is all about being in feminine and being in your flow, and it just seems to me like such a to me that is exactly playing into the patriarchal standards of the society we currently have. Like it's like the clichéest expression of the feminine, like dancing around in your underwear. Like it just doesn't resonate for me. And it just, and I'm starting to, I kind of actually had a taste of it when you were talking. For me, I'm wondering whether actually I have to start way less than like 3 days, because that to me feels like quite a long amount of time. I think my sort of flow, my change almost happens on an hour by hour basis.
Wow.
And it feels a little overwhelming to say that, because that feels like a lot of changing about. But actually, so as you know, I have a part-time job. So I work, my hours are flexible. Like it's 10 o'clock in the morning right now, or 10:30. So I took some time out of my job to come on this call. But my day typically looks like the hours of 9 till 2 are in like production kind of, definitely, and it's a masculine orientated industry, so it's an unhealthy masculine industry. So I typically am in that mode from 9 till 2, and then what tends to happen is I have the afternoons to work on something of my own, or I have a coaching call or something like that, and I go like way into the feminine, and I basically just like, time for myself, how luxurious. And what ends up happening is I just bask in that for too long. And because it feels like such a nourishment after that morning, it feels like, I need this. And then I find it very difficult to shift out of that. And I end up just being in total sloth mode. 6 o'clock will roll around. My partner will come back in through the door, and suddenly, I'm in partner feminine mode. And, that's very different. So I'm wondering just whether there needs to be much more allowance for my own feminine in my part-time job, if that is the case. Like, this is a good example. I've spent 8:30 till 10 o'clock working in the part-time job, and then we go into this, which is much more collaborative, free-flowing, and then at 11:30 I'll go back to the job, and I already know the task that I have to do at 11:30. I'm not looking forward to it at all. So yeah, and I actually don't think that I give myself credit for the time that I spend in masculine, because a strange thing happens with me. I'm not sure whether anyone else will relate to this if you have a part-time job, but because my priorities, my sort of value-based priorities are my business, and are, I want to grow my coaching business, or I want to work on my writing, or I want to do this with you. These are things that I enjoy doing and I value doing. So my part-time job ends up mentally becoming reduced in my mind, and it's like, I just do that to pay the bills. But realistically, the majority of my day, majority of my time is spent doing that job. So what happens is I almost compartmentalize it, and I don't actually give myself any credit for what I'm doing in those hours. They're like imaginary hours. They just happen, and I do my job, and then I have my actual like time. But I just picture myself in sloth mode all the time, because all I see is this like languishing, like, oh my gosh, I must tend to myself, time that I spend outside of that job, and I disregard everything else. So actually, I probably spend a lot more time flowing between the two states than I'm giving myself credit for.
Yeah, and that would make total sense, right? Like, if you're being more in that productive energy for half the day, if we think about balance, you're then, to be in balance, would need to be in the in the less productive, more feminine energy for the rest of the day. So
but then how do I do it?
Yeah.
It's the endless challenge of doing a job to pay the bills and wanting to build up your own business. It's so much harder than you think it's going to be, because you don't have the energy for both. You just don't.
I definitely had that when I was working part-time. It is a challenge for sure, and I mean, it's a challenge, isn't it? But then the alternative is to be in scarcity, and that is not productive either at all. Been in both, and I can say having the job was better than not. So I do get that. But I wonder if it's what you said, right, of like flowing more quickly in and out. Like, for you, if it's on an hourly basis, like, maybe in the afternoon it's like, okay, well, let me spend an hour like in the kind of more of a considered or conscious feminine, like really taking it to the extreme, so that you get the nourishment in an hour that maybe before you were getting in 3 or something. I don't know.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and I think that's important for me to be aware of as well, is like just to notice when I am letting myself languish a little bit, and letting myself be in sloth mode a little bit too much. And actually, it's not nourishing, is it? As I said at the beginning,
it doesn't feel good.
No, it doesn't feel good. It doesn't.
Neither extreme feels good if you stay in it for too long. And I know we've talked about human design a couple of times now in these calls, but just a little side note, this is what the projector conditioning did to me. It made me go, like, it gave me a validity to inaction. So I mean, I think there's a difference between nourishment and using nourishment as an excuse to not do things that you're scared of doing.
Exactly, which it can be. And I think that sort of projector conditioning around capacity is a really, really tricky one, because I can feel that, as I said, I can feel that I've reduced my own capacity. Like I can do more. I can 100%. And they're like actually allowing myself to feel that and to be aware of that is nice. Like that feels good. It feels good to be like, no, Alex, come on, you can do more, and you can do more in a good way, in a right way, in an ethical way, in a sustainable way, and it not be something that's going to knock you out. But you have to accept the fact that you have that something has told you that you can't do as much. I've told myself, because something has told me, maybe the spiritual business space, maybe the human design space, whatever it is, something has told me that your capacity is lower, and I feel like I'm rejecting that idea now.
Yes. Woo! Me too. I love it. And this actually, do you have anything else that feels important to say on this? Because I'm about to transition into a different topic.
I feel it too. There's the moment. Transition away.
Okay, cool. So this actually kind of links to one of the things that was floating around for me that I was maybe going to talk about in this call, which is food, because I changed my diet quite drastically in the last 2 or 3 months, and I have so much more energy. Like, I think that one of the dangerous things about that whole approach world of like rest, it kind of made me feel like it was normal to be so tired.
Yes.
And I'm now seeing the real danger in that, because through changing my diet and seeing, I have so much more energy, I feel so much more alive, my brain fog is gone, I don't have this sort of low level depression, anxiety that I was experiencing before. I was ignoring like any kind of physical reason for that. And that's really scary to me, that I was just like, oh, okay, yeah, this is just normal. Like it normalized it. And that's wild to me. You know, that's scary for me to realize that was happening, because I'm like, oh, I'm so tired because I'm a projector. I'm so tired because I'm highly sensitive. I'm so tired because I'm an empath. No, I'm so tired because I'm having a shit fucking diet. I'm not eating enough. I'm not eating the right foods. Like, just crazy. And that shift happened because I got to the point where I got really sick of the thought that I needed to lose weight.
Yeah.
Like, we've talked about this privately, but like the idea, the thought of I need to lose weight, I'm too fat, I'm too big, I wish I was smaller, like any variation of that thought, I was just like, I'm sick of this thought. I'm sick of this thought being here, and I don't want it anymore. And so I decided just to, this is quite rare for me to approach a situation like this, but for some reason it just made sense at the time. I just thought, anytime I notice that thought come into my head, I'm just going to be like, no, that's not true. Like, you don't get a space here.
Yeah.
And it was really powerful for me, because I started to feel like, oh, okay, maybe it actually isn't true. Like, you know, what felt just like a core truth that I was denying started to lose a bit of its power. And that opened up a space for like some new information to come in, and you know, prioritizing like minerals and my metabolism and hormones and all of those sort of inner functioning things that my body needs. And that was a totally new approach for me. Before, it was all about, what diet can I have to lose weight? And then it became about, how does my body work? Like, how does this thing move through the world every day? And how can it do it at its highest possible expression? And it's just been really cool for me to see that, and to see, like, I went on a hen do about 3 weeks ago now, and had the best time. And no offense to anyone's hen dos that I went to prior to this date, if any of those people see this. But I used to hate going on hen dos, hated it, because I would be so tired. I didn't want to drink, I didn't want to stay up late, I didn't want to be busy, I didn't want to be around that much energy. And this time, with a change in diet, I'm always going to be the type of person who finds being around 15 women, excitable women, a bit much for 3 or 4 days. I'm always going to be that person who's a little bit quieter, who sort of observes rather than is in the thick of it. But I had a great time. I had an amazing time. It was so much fun. And I had the energy to really enjoy it. And that's the first time that I felt like that about an event like that. Wild to me.
How amazing.
Yeah. And before I would have made all those excuses of like why it wasn't my thing. I would have been like, to be honest, really judgmental. And I would have made it about other people. I would have been like, it's just not my it's not my type of women to be around. It's just not the type of, I don't really like to get drunk. So it's, I would have like made excuses for why I couldn't have a good time. And I was just like, wow, you gotta be so willing to look at yourself through a clear lens, I think, to do this. But so worth it, because I got invited to another hen do next August. It's a 3-day tribute festival, which in like 5 hours away, and the previous version of me 6 months ago would have been like, hell no, I'm not going to that. Like, she would have been so drained by the idea of that. And I nearly went into that pattern. I was nearly like, oh, I can't really afford it, and I started making excuses as to why I couldn't go. And then I was like, hold on, no, I'll probably have a great time. So I'm going, and I've said yes, and I'll update you next year. But
I mean, it makes me angry, the things this advice takes from us. Like the experiences and the nourishment of relationships, or anything like that. It like makes us isolated. And it's upsetting.
It really is, because I have, the one that I got invited to next year is a school friend who, after university, she moved out of the area, and we've kind of drifted, and I only see her a couple of times a year, and we don't really talk that much in between. But I grew up with her. Like, what? And I'm not going to go to her hen do because of this crap? Like, no, I want to go. And I've really drifted apart from that group of friends. And I think, I think some of that is like natural. We have very different lives. A lot of them are married with children and have a really different lifestyle than I do. So, you lose those sort of common ground things that sustain friendships. But it's drifted perhaps more than it could have done. And that's on me, because I've gone down this path of being like separate. Let me protect myself by separating myself. And let me make up stories in my head about why that is. About, these people are not conscious, or these, or disagree with them on like core life values. Not true. I have a great time with them. I know I could, now that I have the energy, now that I'm not blinded by that stuff. So this feels kind of like edgy to talk about, because like food and female friendships, like two of the most kind of like things where I'm like, oh, but I think it's important.
Yeah. And I welcome you bringing that, especially if it feels like an edge for you, and because it is important, and it is like the way that life is set up now, it's fucking lonely enough already. Like it's lonely enough without being swept along by, let's face it, a like on the line of a culty way of living, like this sort of spiritual business expression. Like it's crazy to me that how I got into it was business advice, that I started my own, that I left a job. I've always wanted to work for myself. So it was like a dream to discover this online Instagram community that was full of advice and powerful women who were, doing all of this stuff that I wanted to do. And there were Facebook groups and there were communities and there was all of these people who had each other's backs as they were doing it. And so that felt really inspiring to me. And then what happens is that you just become more and more entrenched in a particular way of viewing the world. And it's just talked about by people who are much more intelligent and much more knowledgeable than I am. But, the sort of algorithms of Instagram, people talk about social media being a neutral tool, and it's how we use it that's important. And I just don't think that's the case.
No.
It's built. It can't be a neutral tool if it's built to bring people together along the same views. Intentionally guiding you through an algorithm that takes you closer and closer and really what's the opposite of dilutes? Like
intensifies.
That will do. Intensifies those views that you hold. And that we mentioned briefly on our last call, I think, about human design advice, saying about sleeping in different beds from your partner and how as a projector that's going to make you feel better. Of course,
it hurts my heart.
Better. Like you're not sleeping with a different person in your bed. Like
oh my god, it hurts my heart. It hurts my heart because I'm like, just to jump in there like that, I was talking to Rob seriously about having separate beds, or being able to sleep separately a couple of nights a week or something. And what was I giving up our intimacy, our connection, our like, no, please.
Yeah. And that's the thing, like it feels like you see a post about that sort of thing and then you read the comments below and it's all like, yes, oh my god, this changed my life. Like sleeping in a separate bed is like, oh, my energy is so clear now. I'm like, you're just fucking stretching out. That's what you're stretching out and you're having a good night's sleep. Like that's not your energy becoming crystallized and clear from not sleeping next to your partner. Like I know it's a fine line because of course there are things that we can't see and cannot prove and do not know. And the way that our society and businesses and relationships have been built up until this point has problems because there's millions of them. But this like just fully jumping over, it's like that pendulum swing, fully going over into this like wildly energetic, sort of believing all the advice that you read on Instagram. And I say this being through it, with no judgment. I fully believed all the advice that I read on Instagram. So it's not good either. And so and it is, I say this just because of what you were saying about friendships. There is a truth in that we do find different interests from our friends that we had when we were younger. And it's true that we maybe divert on beliefs about different things, and that maybe you and we have had a taste of, energetics and kind of that sort of thing. So it does influence. I mean, I've always been a little bit like contrary. Like I don't, and I think we have that in common. Like you see something, you kind of like, but is it like that really?
Yeah.
So there is a truth in that, but to kind of follow that thread all through, and in order to do so, in order to be successful and for it not to feel like you're isolating yourself, you have to then make your the group of women around you or the group of people around you, all of the same mindset and all believing of the same thing and all going through the same thing. So you self reinforce that idea. Otherwise it feels like shit. Unless you're lucky enough to be one of the people who makes those really strong bonds within an online community, lives closely to other people, like in a sort of LA type scenario where loads of people are doing the same sort of thing. Whether if you have the money to travel to places like Burning Man or Joshua Tree or, you know, any of these places where you can form these bonds, it's going to feel isolating and it's going to feel really uncomfortable. And that's scary. It's scary. It worries me for people. It worries me for us, for ourselves. It would we've been there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? And I think it is, as you said, it's natural for some, changes to happen as you grow up and stuff, but it's just the lens I was looking at it through that I can now see that the problem in, these people are probably not going to be people that I, speak to every day or even every week. We're not in each other's pockets, but it had got to the point where I was like, not going to go to their hen do's, and that's rubbish. I don't want that. So it's cool. And female friendships are complex, but I think that if you can be really open and really honest in life, then you can have great female friendships. And I think that there can be a lot of fear, can't there? There can be a lot of fear, but I've made amazing friends through coming into this world. I met 2 people in my coaching course 5 years ago, and I'm going to her wedding this weekend. It's beautiful, and we met through the industry. So it's so cool, and I don't want to we both know how important these things are, but it's finding that balance. This whole call feels like it's about the topic of balance, really. Balanced energy, balanced friendships, balanced masculine feminine.
And balance, I think the word sort of has this this idea that it's about equality, that it's an equal amount of one and the other. And the more that I sort of navigate my relationship with it, the more that I start to understand that it's not really 50-50. It's about movement between the two. And sometimes that's going to look like 70-30. Sometimes it's going to look like 50-50, and sometimes you're going to get stuck like me in sloth mode, or you're going to swing completely one way. But the balance comes in the middle part. It's not in the amount of each one, but in the transition between the two.
I love that movement. That it makes so much sense, right? Because you brought in the analogy of nature, and I use nature so much as a symbolic in my work and my conversations with people. And nature's never static, right? Even when it looks like it is, even when the trees are seemingly in hibernation mode in the winter, then if you could peek under the ground or look inside them, there's still so much happening to prepare for the next season. So nature is never still, ever. If it stopped, imagine if the earth stopped spinning just for half a second, it would throw out everything. So so movement, I think that's a beautiful way to think about it. Is am I static or am I moving? And if you're moving, you probably know that you're more in balance.
I think I saw this on someone's random van travel YouTube video, And I can't even remember whose it was, so I can't tell you to go watch it, but it was just a comment they made as they were walking through a forest. They had this guide, I think it was Poland. There was a Polish guide taking them through a really old forest in Poland, and the guide told them that, like, something like, I'm going to mess up this statistic, take this number with a pinch of salt, but something like 70% of the wood in a forest is dead wood, and it has to be because that sustains the life of the forest. And I just found that like so fascinating. Like, even after a tree falls and it is deteriorating, literally decaying and dying, or is dead, that wood is so crucial for the forest, for the sustaining of that forest, for the insects, for life in there. It's incredible, really.
Yeah, and isn't that cool? It's like we can take these nature analogies so far, and that's why I love them, because, you know, if we think about us as an individual, like, you're not a single tree, you're more like a forest.
Yeah.
You know, your body, your being is more like a whole forest than a tree. So I love that idea of this interconnected movement, life force, expression. It's just beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's maybe actually to kind of just follow that analogy down the road a little bit. It's really making me think about how the sloth years, this sloth time, has maybe actually just been a little bit of dead wood rejuvenating my system. And it's kind of, as you walk down through a forest, you see all these trees that are falling, wood on the ground, you kind of think, oh, it's just, messy, like that tree's falling down, how sad. But the falling in itself is part of the process.
Yeah, and I think that's such a good thing to such a good way to think about that rest time for you, as being that essential dead wood, because what I'm seeing and how it is for me and the people that I'm having these types of conversation with is like, we kind of had to do the feminine healing first, it seems. I don't know if that's the same for everyone, but a lot of the people I'm talking to, that seems to be the case, that there has to be this resetting of the feminine, and that does look like often lots of rest time, lots of being like, no more pushing through, no more not honoring my cycles, no more not honoring my softness, or whatever it is. So I think, it's essential to get to that point. And I'm not sure how great it would be to try and do the healing of the toxic, patriarchal, unhealthy masculine without the grounding really of that feminine to come home to like come back to when needed. So I think what I have to believe, and what I do believe because of all the evidence I've seen, is like the processes that are happening within us are happening perfectly, in exactly the perfect order, in exactly the perfect timing, and we just can't always see that from our perspective.
And I think we can see that, to zoom out, in our societies, and this, the work that feminism has already done in sort of creating more equality, allowing the feminine to take up space, allowing the that to heal that side of things first. If we get to the point where we have that that healed, feminine, accessible, grounded, healing, compassionate nature, only then do we get to heal the sort of toxic masculinity. And that feels like a really necessary and powerful space to do that from.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like a little macro micro thing that's happening there, isn't it? Like it's happening within each of us, and then it's happening in the wider society and the world as a whole.
Yeah.
Can
happen in the wider society because it's happening on an individual basis.
Yeah. And here's how we create change, right? I think a lot of people feel kind of helpless of like there's so many problems in the world. And it was Jordan Peterson I heard say, stop worrying about the world until you've sorted yourself out. Like, and he, I actually love how directly he speaks about things like this. And I know he's the sort of a bit of a Marmite, love him or hate him character. But
I've never really listened. I've heard his name, but no, I've never really listened.
I mean, he's a real departure from the sloth space. So it might be a good time to go and check
Quite
him
activating.
out.
I'm listening to a lot of Stephen Bartlett at the moment, Diary of a CEO.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether it's particularly healthy masculinity, but it's definitely activating masculinity.
Yeah, but this is the thing, isn't there? Aren't many examples. There really aren't. But I think trying to seek those out and find those examples is helpful. It's at least being helpful for me. And I think sacred, healthy masculine is quite hard for us to recognize because there's not much of it. And when we see men who are in that healthy expression, we kind of like think of them as more feminine. And that's a mistake. Like, that's not what it is. So, yeah. But yeah, I'd love to know what you think of Jordan Peterson. If you go and watch him, that would be interesting conversation.
Definitely. Yeah, I think I heard his name during the whole like COVID controversy era, and I got way too attached to reading too many conspiracies, so I just pretty much detoxed from anyone who was raging too much about this. But I'm intrigued actually, and I'm curious about, because I know the sort of masculine feminine conversation has its roots in sort of Eastern philosophy around yin and yang. And you know more about this than I do. Does yin and yang mean masculine and feminine, or have we taken those philosophies and made them mean masculine and feminine?
Well, I don't know if they were originally intended to represent those two things, but the words and the kind of essence that are associated with each match what we would associate with feminine and masculine.
Right.
So yin is like slower, softer, yielding, represents like the dark. So that would be the feminine. So I don't know if we've just like taken that symbol and made it masculine and feminine, but it definitely holds the essence.
Yeah, because I'm just curious, because like we said about the conversation being sort of like a little bit charged, a little bit overused. I'm just curious what the essence of the conversation is. Like, is it distracting to be talking about masculine and feminine, or is it useful? Like, it's useful in a way to zoom out and look at it from a society lens. It's interesting, but what's the like? Yeah, I'm wondering whether those words are right for me, or whether that's not how I see it. And I haven't thought about this at all. I think because the words are so used, they're so widely used within, the kind of online communities that we're part of. Masculine and feminine is just like, it's such a commonly used expression. But yeah, I don't know if that is how I resonate with that.
I think people have got to find the language that's important, like makes sense to them, doesn't it? I think for me it's helpful because it can encompass many things. So if I was to go, okay, I'm going to talk about it in terms of like rest and productivity, it's like that's too reductive, because it needs, for me at least, it needs to be about more than that. When I flow into the feminine, I'm not just talking about rest, I'm talking about my connection with spirit. I'm talking about that flow of receiving inspiration. I'm talking about coming like deep within myself. And yeah, I don't have another word for that total experience apart from feminine. I mean, yin kind of could encompass it, definitely, but yeah, it's like it's a bigger feeling for me. And maybe it's something that's beyond language, you know, maybe it's more about sensation and feeling and experience. And we just have to label it as something.
No, yeah, our brains, they need it. They need that the language to put a stamp on what it is. But yeah, I think like with this sort of, I think it does get mixed up for me in this sort of this image that I've been sold throughout my whole life, but definitely on the internet, of what a woman should be and what feminine should be. It definitely gets mixed up in that for me. And I'm like, oh, if I'm in my feminine, then that means that I have to like be like, I mean, it's the word luscious is coming to mind.
Yeah.
And I just get the image of like body oils and of like, you know, all those kind of things. And I'm like, yeah. And that, again, that's reductive because it's not just that. And I know we can sort of like teach ourselves or learn from other people about widening that definition of femininity, which is incredibly important. But yeah, I'm reminded of Glennon Doyle's book, Untamed, where she talks about, can't remember if she's talking about sexuality in this part of the book or if she's talking about gender, but she says about how she uses the analogy, I think she's talking about a bowl of soup or something. I can't remember exactly, but she's basically just like, we got it wrong in the first place. Like we thought, you know, that you had straight and gay, and then actually now we're learning that it's like this big soup of sexuality, and there's not really it's not even really right to talk about it as it being like a spectrum or on a line, because that's not the case. It's just all one thing. And I think sometimes we can get so tied up in our definitions of things, in our labeling of certain things, that we're like, we forget that it's all just a big soup. And this feels like for the same for me, that feminine carries such a connotation, such an image, that I'm like, maybe I need to take that word off, and that might allow me to move into more of that transitory balance space.
I think I think it's so valuable to be able to have that movement, that whatever you need to do in order to have that is what you should do, because it's the value you get from it is so wide, so great. And I think, you know, I've questioned it myself a little bit, of like, because I find it cringe because it's overused. And I've had to come to a place of like, this is the language that the people I want to talk to about this are using at the moment. Like, this is how it's understood in this community. So I kind of had to find a way to get over my cringe to talk about it with that community. And then, you know, for me internally, it's a bit different. I don't really use those words with myself necessarily as much as I would in like the public domain. So I think there can be like two sides of that, can't there? How do we talk about it publicly versus how do we talk about it internally with ourselves? But yeah, it's so much bigger than a label, for sure. I feel that.
Yeah, I love that.
Cool. Is there anything else coming up right now?
I don't think so.
Mm.
I don't think so. I think that feels not from my side. How about you?
Yeah, I think that feels complete. I think there's so many tangents we could like carry on talking for hours on, but for this call, I think we've come to a natural stop.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Okay, well, I will stop recording. Thank you so much. Lovely.
You're